Parents said, "We can't walk on eggshells." And I remembered tiptoeing past their door praying they were asleep. I was sitting at their kitchen table when they said it, fingers wrapped around a mug of tea that had already gone cold. The clock above the fridge ticked way too loud, cutting through the dull hum of the dishwasher. Dad's face was redder than it should have been for 10 in the morning, and Mum was leaning back against the counter with her arms crossed, dish towel still in her hand like she'd frozen halfway through wiping something up. "We can't say anything anymore," Mum added, shaking her head. "It's like anything we do, you're triggered." She said the last word like it tasted bad. My knee bounced under the table, and I dug my nails into the side of my leg to make it stop. For context, I'm 28, oldest of 3, and this conversation was apparently the result of me texting them a week earlier saying I needed a little space after our last family dinner. I hadn't screamed or thrown anything or cut them off dramatically. I'd just written, "Hey, I love you both." But some of the jokes about my anxiety and being the dramatic one really got to me. I need a bit of distance while I sort through how I feel. That was it. One slightly shaky text drafted and redrafted 5 times in my notes app. A week later, Mum called and said, "Come over, your father and I need to clear the air," which is how I ended up sitting in the same chair I used to sit in doing homework while Dad slammed cupboards, and Mum told me to ignore him, he's just stressed. "What do you mean, eggshells?" I asked, but my voice sounded thinner than I wanted. I tried to hold their eyes, but my gaze kept flicking to the kitchen door, to the hallway beyond it, to the old beige carpet I'd once used as a map of safe and unsafe zones depending on where Dad was. Dad snorted. "We can't joke. We can't tell you the truth. We can't even raise our voices without you acting like we've committed some giant crime." He tapped the table with one thick finger on each word. "We are tired of it." "You called me mentally unstable in front of my cousins," I said quietly. My chest felt tight, like someone had dropped a brick on it. "You told everyone I'd finally gone crazy enough to get therapy." "That's not a joke." Mum rolled her eyes. "You know your father. He exaggerates. It's his sense of humor." "I wasn't laughing," I said. "Well, we can't walk on eggshells every time you come over," Dad repeated. Spreading his hands like that settled it. "People say things. Families tease. You read too much into everything." Something about the phrase "walk on eggshells" made my skin crawl. It was so backwards I almost laughed. As he said it, I was suddenly 8 years old again, feet sinking into the worn hallway carpet, holding my breath as I crept past their bedroom door, listening for the heavy, uneven rhythm of Dad's snores. If I heard the television and muffled curses instead, I'd turn around and sneak back to my room, because awake meant dangerous. Awake meant slammed doors and footsteps coming too fast down the hall. "You do realize," I said slowly, "that I literally grew up walking on eggshells around you, right?" My hand had started to shake, so I put the mug down before I spilled it. Dad barked a humorless laugh. "Oh, here we go. It's not like that," Mum said. "You kids don't understand how much pressure we were under back then." Back then, their catch-all phrase. Back then when money was tight. Back then when Dad had a temper. Back then when everyone yelled and that's just how people were. Back then, which somehow they believed existed in a different moral universe where their choices didn't count the same. I can't explain what it feels like to sit across from the people who raised you and hear them complain about imaginary eggshells while you remember calculating how many steps from your bed to the front door, just in case. It's surreal. Like you and them watched different movies and are now arguing about the plot. Growing up, our house was normal from the outside. 3-bedroom brick place on a quiet street. Mum who packed lunches. Dad who worked at the factory. Kids in uniforms walking to the bus stop. My friends would come over and comment on how nice it was that Mum always had biscuits and Dad would call out, "Hey, mate," like some sitcom father. No one saw the way Emma and I flinched when a car door slammed outside, or how Sam and I would share a look when we heard the garage door open too fast, motor grinding. Dad's mood ran the household like weather. On good days, he'd come home with meat pies and shout, "Who wants dinner?" and ruffle our hair too hard. On bad days, you could tell from the driveway. If the front door opened slowly and closed carefully, If you heard his shoes get kicked against the step instead of neatly placed, you knew you needed to disappear. Mum would go quiet, moving around the kitchen with her shoulders up by her ears. We'd retreat to our rooms and turn our music down low enough to pretend we couldn't hear the yelling. "Give me an example," Mum said now, dropping the dish towel on the counter like a challenge, "of when you actually had to walk on eggshells." My jaw clenched. There were so many examples they blurred together sometimes, but one night always stood out more than the others. I picked that one. "Remember when I was 14 and I dropped the orange juice?" I said. She frowned. "Vaguely. It spilled everywhere," I continued, my heart starting to race like I was back there on that sticky kitchen tile. "And you looked at me and just froze. You didn't even say anything, you just made that face and then you quietly said, 'Go to your room.'" "Because you should have been more careful," Dad cut in. "Because you knew he'd lose it?" I shot back, pointing at him. And he did. I could hear him from my bedroom. I heard him screaming about waste and how he worked his ass off while you cleaned it up. You smashed the glass in the sink by accident because you were shaking so hard. And I sat on my bed and counted every yell because I thought any second he'd stomp down the hall and come for me. No one spoke for a few seconds. The dishwasher clicked to the next part of its cycle, a long low buzz. "I sent you to your room so you wouldn't have to hear that," Mum said eventually, but there wasn't much conviction behind it. "I heard all of it," I said. "Every single word." "You're making it sound worse than it was," Dad muttered. "It was bad enough that I learned to move like a ghost," I said. "I learned which floorboards creaked. I knew exactly how to twist the doorknob so it wouldn't click. I used to hold my breath walking past your room because if you woke up, there was a 50-50 chance you'd decide you were mad at me." As I talked, my body did that weird thing where it can't tell past from present. My palms were sweaty, my throat was dry, and I could feel that old hollow feeling under my ribs, the one that meant be small, be quiet, be invisible. I looked down at my hands on the table and realized I'd made fists without noticing. Mum sighed heavily and sat down across from me. "We've apologized for yelling," she said. "We've said sorry a million times. We can't keep living in the past." "That's the thing," I said, and my voice cracked. "I don't actually remember you apologizing. I remember you saying, 'That's just how families are.' I remember, 'We did our best.' I remember, 'You kids had a roof over your heads, didn't you?' But I don't remember you ever saying, 'It was wrong that you were scared of us.'" Dad made a noise somewhere between a scoff and a cough. "You weren't scared of us," he said. "Don't be ridiculous. You argued back plenty." Right there, I almost backed down. It's like my brain is wired to find their version of events first. I did argue back sometimes. I did slam my door once or twice, shout, "I hate you," like a TV teenager. That must mean I wasn't really scared, right? Never mind how my heart raced, or how I always positioned myself between them and my younger siblings, like some scrawny human shield. I swallowed hard. "I argued back because I was terrified and no one else was standing up for us," I said, softer this time. "Not because I wasn't scared." Mum blinked a few times, and for a second I saw something like doubt cross her face. Then she looked away and reached for her mug. "Well, we can't change it now," she said. "We did our best." There it was. The phrase that had been following me into therapy for the last year. I started seeing a therapist because my girlfriend at the time gently suggested it. She'd come over to my apartment after a long shift, dropped her keys in the bowl by the door a little too loudly, and I'd flinched so hard I nearly knocked a lamp over. She watched me freeze, eyes wide, and said quietly, "You know that reaction isn't normal, right?" I laughed it off at first. "My dad has a temper. It's not that bad." She looked at me for a long moment and then said, "It sounds like it was that bad." In therapy, I told myself I was there to deal with work stress. I talked about deadlines and my boss's passive-aggressive emails. But the more I talked, the more little things slipped out. My dad used to yell a lot. My parents joke that I was the difficult child. My brother still apologizes for everything. It's annoying. My therapist never pushed, just kept asking, "And how did that feel?" Until one day I was describing that same orange juice incident and suddenly realized I was crying so hard I could barely breathe. It's strange, I told her. I have all these memories, but they're like muted. And then sometimes they're not muted and it feels like I'm right there again. That's common, she said gently. Especially if you've spent a long time minimizing what you went through. But it wasn't like abuse, I said quickly. The word felt huge and dramatic and wrong in my mouth. I wasn't locked in a basement. They didn't, hit us with belts every day or anything. Children don't have to be locked in basements for their nervous systems to be shaped by fear, she replied. You keep using phrases like walking on eggshells and waiting for the explosion. That tells me a lot about what it was like in your house. I told her about Mum's favorite line, "We did our best." How she'd say it whenever I brought up anything unpleasant. We did our best with what we had. We did our best, you kids turned out fine. It sat in my chest like a stop sign. Every time I tried to go past it and say, "But I'm not fine," my throat closed up. Maybe both can be true, my therapist suggested one day. Maybe they did the best they knew how, and their best was still harmful to you. I walked around with that sentence in my head for weeks, like a rock in my shoe. It rubbed every time I moved, but eventually it wore a new path. It's part of why I sent that first text about needing space. Sitting at the table now, listening to Dad rant about how kids these days are all trauma-obsessed. I felt that rock again. You never had to walk on eggshells, he said. You had food, you had clothes, you had a mother who bent over backwards for you. One broken plate, and suddenly we were monsters. It was never about the plate, I snapped, louder than I meant to. My voice bounced off the tiled walls. It was about never knowing which version of you we were getting. It was about Emma hiding in the wardrobe when she heard your car. It was about Sam getting migraines in year 5 and the doctor saying they were stress-related. Mum flinched. Don't drag your brother and sister into this. They're already in it, I said. We all lived in that house. I thought about the message Emma had sent me a few days after that last family dinner. Hey, are you okay? You looked like you were going to cry when Dad did that. Remember when you cried for 3 hours over nothing story? I typed and erased my response 3 times before finally writing, yeah, just old stuff. I'll call you later. I wondered if she was sitting at work right now, or on her couch, or in her car scrolling her phone, not realizing our parents were currently complaining about imaginary eggshells. I wondered when she'd learn to walk quietly. Mum exhaled slowly, like she was forcing herself to be patient. We're just saying, she said, that we shouldn't have to censor ourselves around our own child. We shouldn't have to constantly worry, oh, will this upset them? Are we allowed to joke about this? That's what we mean by eggshells. In other words, I said, you don't want to think before you speak. That's not fair, she protested. Neither was being told I was too sensitive every time I cried, I replied. For a moment, all 3 of us looked at each other like strangers. I could feel that old, familiar urge rising in me. To smooth it over, to make a joke, to say something self-deprecating so they'd laugh and the tension would break. I almost did it. The words, I know, I'm dramatic, were right there on my tongue. But then a different memory came up. Me, 15, sitting on my bed with the door closed, hearing Dad stomping around downstairs. He'd just yelled at Sam for leaving shoes in the hallway. I'd heard the crack of something hitting the wall. Sam came upstairs with wide eyes, clutching his wrist. It's fine, he whispered when I asked, but his voice shook. I remember telling him, just stay in here with me, don't go back down. And the 2 of us listening to the house like it was an animal that might bite. Back then, I'd thought once I'm grown up, I'll never feel like this again. I'd pictured my adult self as someone confident and steady, who could walk into any room without scanning for exits. It didn't occur to me that I might be almost 30 and still flinch at the sound of raised voices. So instead of making a joke, I took a breath that felt like swallowing glass and said, I don't need you to censor yourselves. I'm asking you to take responsibility for the fact that some of the things you say and did hurt me. And when I tell you that, I need you not to make it about how hard it is for you. Mum's eyes got shiny, and for a split second, hope flickered in my chest. Maybe this was it, the moment. Maybe she'd say, "You're right. I'm sorry." Maybe Dad would shift uncomfortably and mumble, "Yeah, we screwed up." Instead, she shook her head and wiped under her eyes angrily. "You have no idea how much I went through," she said. "I stayed with your father for you. I put up with his moods so you kids would have a father in the house. Do you know what my friends said when I told them I was thinking of leaving? They told me I'd be selfish. And now you sit here and throw it in my face like I enjoyed any of it." "That's not what I'm saying," I started. "You never think about what it was like for me," she continued, voice rising. "All you do is sit in therapy and pick apart every little thing I did wrong. That's all we are to you now. Mistakes to analyze." Dad nodded, leaning back in his chair like he'd just won a point. "Exactly. You're rewriting history. We weren't perfect, but we weren't abusive." There it was again, that word hanging in the air, unsaid until now. Abusive. I watched it float there between us. "I didn't call you abusive," I lied. I had in my head many times, but out loud, it still felt like stepping off a cliff. "I said I grew up scared. That's just a fact." "Same thing," Dad said. I realized then that we weren't having the same conversation. I was trying to talk about impact, they were defending intent. I was saying I was scared, and they were hearing, "You're evil people." To them, the idea that they might have harmed me without meaning to was more unbearable than the idea that I lived my childhood with my shoulders up to my ears. "I think I need to go," I said quietly. Mum's head snapped up. "Oh, of course. Run away. That's easier than listening to us. Staying and getting yelled at about how hard it was for you isn't really helping," I said. I pushed my chair back. My legs felt like they were full of sand. "You always were dramatic," Dad muttered. There was a time when that sentence would have gutted me. I would have felt my cheeks heat up and stammered something about not meaning to be. This time it just made me tired. "I'm not being dramatic," I said. "I'm taking care of myself." I grabbed my bag from the back of the chair. My hand brushed against the wooden backrest, smooth from years of us sliding in and out of it for dinners, homework, arguments. I thought about all the versions of me that had sat there. Small, hunched, eager, angry, desperate. Felt weirdly like I was leaving her behind too. On the drive home, my mind did what it always does. Replayed every line, but with edits. I should have said this. I shouldn't have said that. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I should go back and apologize. Maybe they're sitting at the table right now talking about how ungrateful I am. Maybe this will be the thing they tell stories about in 10 years. Remember when she stormed out just because we said we couldn't walk on eggshells? By the time I pulled into my apartment's parking lot, my hands were shaking worse than they had at the table. I sat in the car with the engine off and my forehead against the steering wheel, listening to my own breathing. "You always were dramatic. We can't walk on eggshells. We did our best." Over and over like a broken radio. I went upstairs, kicked my shoes off, and lay down on the couch without even taking my coat off. My phone buzzed beside me. A text from Emma. "Mum just called me." What happened? I stared at the screen. I could already hear Mum's version in my head. How I'd attacked them, how I'd accused them of being bad parents, how they couldn't say anything to me without me having a meltdown. "We talked about eggshells." I wrote, "I'll call you later." I ended up writing this instead, because I don't know if I'm doing the right thing. I don't know if taking space from your parents when they're not cartoon villains, when they're just flawed, defensive, stuck people makes you cold. They're not monsters. They also made me pancakes on my birthday every year. They came to my school plays. Mum kissed my forehead when I had fevers and stayed up all night watching my chest rise and fall. Dad taught me how to ride a bike and cheered like a maniac when I let go of the fence. Those things are real too. And yet, so are the eggshells in the hallway. So is the way my heart rate spikes when someone slams a door. So is the fact that at 28, I still have to consciously remind myself that anger doesn't always mean danger. I don't know how to hold both truths without dropping one. I don't know how to explain to my parents that I'm not trying to put them on trial. I'm trying not to keep sentencing myself to relive a version of childhood where my feelings were always too much. All I know is that when they said, "We can't walk on eggshells," I remembered tiptoeing past their door, muscles aching from staying so tense all the time, and I thought maybe it's okay if, for once, I put the eggshells down and walk away.